Um, yeah, what a week. It's just every day something. But but before we talk about of course, everybody is talking about the.
China, yes,
Go ahead.
China's absolutely becoming more important every day. By the way, when we talk about all of these things,
Yeah.
we will find that China is there in the
Hmm.
background with all of them.
Yeah. So before we're talking about the trade deal, all that sort of thing, and Trump's trip and all that, I still want to go back to the victory parade because I think it's important. We talk
Yeah,
about history, right? And we
yeah,
should not forget, lots of things happening today has is direct consequence of World War II. So
mhm,
one thing, Xi Jinping before he went to Russia, he actually pinned a letter, I mean an article, and in Chinese and English, and I think it's important to talk about that a
yeah.
little bit. So in that article, it was, of course, well published. I guess they published in Russia as well. So
Oh
in the article,
yeah.
he talked about how hard the World War II. It was hardly fought by both China and Russia, a Soviet, and how the friendship and all that kind of thing. But he also very much emphasized, the post-World War order now. It seems like the China and Russia is now keeping that order, basically
Yeah.
implying that the West is not doing that. And then, of course, for the Chinese, the one paragraph is extremely important. He talked about Taiwan, which lots of people probably don't know. Taiwan is direct result of World War II. So here's what he says. He said, Taiwan's restoration to China is a victorious outcome of World War II and an integral part of the post-war international order, a series of instruments with legal effect under international law, including the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, have all affirmed China's sovereignty over Taiwan. The historical and the legal fact that therein brooks no challenge, and the authority of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 brooks no challenge, no matter how the situation on the Taiwan island evolves or what troubles external forces may make, the historical trend toward China's ultimate and inevitable reunification is unstoppable. So he's reminding people the legal foundation for China's claim to Taiwan is not just the we, China here, claim that. They are legal foundations. What is your take on that?
You are absolutely correct. Now, I think a few things I would also like to say about Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, because
Mhm.
the media in Russia continue to talk about it. I'm talking. I mean specifically Xi Jinping's visit to
Mhm.
Moscow and his
Yeah.
attendance there. And Putin has been making various comments, further comments about this. And I don't know whether it's been picked up in China, but the Russians, Putin himself, has been saying that Xi Jinping was the primary guest at
Mhm.
this event, that he was, in fact, accepted by the Russians as the first amongst equals of all
Mhm.
of the other leaders there, that he was the most important and primary guest. So the Russian media has been reminding Russians that, of course, the Soviet Union made the biggest
Mhm.
contribution to defeating Germany, but China made the biggest contribution to defeating Japan,
Mhm.
and that after the Soviet Union, it was China that suffered the greatest losses. So the Russians have always been, in my experience, much more conscious of China's contribution to the victory in the Second World War, which, remember, for the Russians is the most important single event in modern history by far.
Mhm.
It's the key event. But the media in Russia, and this isn't just state-controlled media, that there is state-controlled media in Russia,
Mhm.
but there's been a sustained effort in Russia to remind everybody in Russia that Russia's single most important ally by far
Mhm.
in the Second World War, in terms of the joint struggle against fascism, and in terms of the losses that it experienced, and in terms of its duration in fighting in the war, was China,
Mhm.
not Britain. not the United States. Now, this is an important. It's a shift because especially in Soviet times, at least the later Soviet times, it was always the alliance with the United States and Britain, and they will have the pictures of Yalta and Potsdam and Stalin and Roosevelt and Churchill and all of that. But now, quietly, that is being downgraded, and they're talking about China as being the most important partner. And the point was that they hosted Xi Jinping in Moscow, and that was appropriate because of the role that China played in the struggle against the joint struggle against fascism in the Second World War. Now, all of that, and of course, the Russians have consistently taken a very strong line. By the way, they did even during the time of the Sino-Soviet conflict. They never, at any point, questioned that there was only one government in China, and that is the government of the People's Republic of China, and Taiwan was a part of it, is a part of China, and that the legitimate government of Taiwan, therefore, is the government of the People's Republic of China. Even during the tensions in the 60s and 70s, the Russians, to their credit, never lost sight of that, and always had at least that bit of sense never to go back on any of that. Anyway, Lavrov, by the way, about 3 weeks ago, actually did a long piece, which I should try and find for you, in which he discussed this issue of Taiwan, and he said this incredible hypocrisy that the Western powers are showing in relation to Taiwan, that they accept Taiwan as part of China, that they accept Taiwan as Chinese, and yet, despite all their other rhetoric about observing international law and all of that, they're really going out of their way to undermine it. This point about that Xi Jinping has made, and it's been completely ignored in the West, by the way. His article is nothing that Xi Jinping ever says ever gets published in the West, at least not in the media here. You find lots of quotations of things that Xi Jinping is supposed to have said, which you quickly discover he never said. But what he actually says is scarcely ever published here. People, as a result, by the way, people have a completely mistaken view of his opinions and personality, which I can't emphasize too strongly how distorted people's understanding of his opinions is in the West. But this point he has made about Taiwan, the status of Taiwan having been settled over the course of these agreements that were reached at the end of the Second World War, which is the foundation period of international law, and of how China and Russia are the joint defenders of that peace settlement. Now, that's actually quite new. At least it is new to me. I've never come across this before. And by the way, Xi Jinping is absolutely right. The fact that it's new to me is a sign of how completely distorted the whole narrative about the end of the Second World War is in the West, because people just don't cover the Chinese side of the story. So because of this, these important facts tend to get overlooked. So it wasn't something that I'd appreciated myself, but he's absolutely right to bring it up, and he's absolutely right in the points that he is making, and it's good that he's reminding everybody of it, because it does go back to that time, and of course all of these decisions that were made at the time of the Second World War, they do a number of things. Firstly, they recognize that Taiwan had fallen under Japanese control as a direct product of Japanese aggression against China. So there's no question then at that time of Taiwan as being part of China and controlled by Japan as a result of fascist aggression. To use that term simply. And of course, China is an ally in the Second World War and is recognized in all of those declarations as a victim of aggression, which it has been successfully resisting. So he's absolutely right in what he says, by the way, in every part of it. And of course, the decisions made in Potsdam are absolutely key in establishing the post-war settlement. Yalta and Potsdam are what lead to the creation of the United Nations. I'm not sure whether China was represented in Yalta. I think it was in Potsdam. Which is, but I mean, the thing to understand about Yalta and Potsdam is that Yalta, they had this meeting and then it was postponed and then it was, adjourned. And then the meeting then was reconvened in Potsdam because in Yalta, they couldn't follow through with all parts of the meeting because they needed to defeat Germany first. So there was the meeting in Potsdam, which was a direct follow-up to the meeting in Yalta. Nothing about those two meetings, by the way, that you read in the West is true. I think China was represented in Yalta. In Potsdam. Yeah. I think so. And the point about Potsdam and Yalta is, of course, it set up the whole structure of international law, including it agreed on, it finalized the agreement on the United Nations. And of course, because China was at that time recognized as such a key ally, China was made one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So it was a core participant in the victory. I would quickly add as a historical detail that the Soviet leader of that time, Joseph Stalin, took a very deep interest in Chinese matters. Other Soviet leaders who followed him, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and all of those, to nothing like the same extent. But Stalin was very, very interested in China. He was heavily involved in supporting China in the 1920s and 30s. He took a great interest in the conflict there between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party of China. He supported Mao's leadership of the Communist Party. Again, it's a more complicated story than I'm making it appear, but when Mao became leader of the Communist Party, Stalin accepted that. And again, there's lots of legends and stories about what happened when Chairman Mao came to Moscow. I think he came to Moscow twice in the 1940s. But the reality is that Stalin received him again as the most important leader in the international communist movement, apart from himself. And Chairman Mao was present during Stalin's 70th birthday celebrations. And if you see all of the film of that time, he has Mao sitting next to him. I mean, so all the other people are behind, including all the other members of the Politburo. But Chairman Mao is always there, sitting along Stalin throughout all of those events. So Stalin certainly took a great interest in Chinese affairs and would have known all about Taiwan and had his own feelings about the Kuomintang and about Chiang Kai-shek in particular. And he certainly did understand fully the importance of China's contributions. And I'm sure that he was definitely one of those people who would have advocated strongly over Taiwan. And by the way, though I know less about this, I suspect that the same was true of President Roosevelt, who also had a certain understanding and sympathy for China as well. So the interest in China faded in the West and even in the Soviet Union afterwards, but it was very much at the forefront of people's minds in the discussions that took place in the 1940s.
FDR was also instrumental in Xi Jinping's article. He also mentioned about the United Nations come into place, and The UN 5 permanent member, the reason China got in, yes, the Soviet was supportive of that, and FDR was instrumental. I mean, FDR
Yeah,
has a very
absolutely.
interesting story with China. He never been to China, but he somehow have a very deep feeling for China because his grandfather on his mother's
Yes.
side did a lot of business in China. So I guess when he's
Oh,
growing
I didn't
up, he
know.
just heard a lot of nice stories about China, and in his grandfather's house is full of beautiful porcelains and stuff coming from China. So he just, I guess, grown up. And in that event, what I heard
Oh, right.
from,
I didn't know any of that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what I
Okay.
heard was that multiple sources saying when he brought up, okay, the 5 permanent member of the UN, he said China before he said about United Kingdom, and Churchill was shocked by that. That's what I heard.
Does well. That doesn't surprise me. By the way, the story that there was this great friendship between Churchill and Roosevelt is a myth, which the British have constructed.
Yeah.
It simply isn't true.
Uh-huh.
Roosevelt had a lot of. I mean, he didn't particularly like Churchill, and that's the
Uh-huh.
truth of it. But that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, but I think that Xi Jinping really want to convince, everybody. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
really need to
Yeah.
convince people, just the fact, right? Both the Cairo Declaration and Potsdam Proclamation. I mean, regarding China part, it's just saying that all the territories taken by the Japanese need to return back to China, and that's of course including Taiwan. And they never said anything about independence or split China, nothing like that. It's one China, and all the territories the Japanese took go back to China. That's it. And so not to get Taiwan back to China in lots of Chinese view is not following through what was settled during World War II. So it's not even respectful of everybody agrees. So that's how people sees it. And so, but
I
I don't think the West see it that way. They don't even talk about the Potsdam Proclamation or Cairo Declaration, right? That they really want people to forget about that. Don't you think that's what the West want to do?
Well, this is absolutely correct. I mean, this is what is so frustrating because
Yeah.
this is always the way with the West. History never really. I mean, the Western approach to history is to pick and choose.
Uh-huh.
You
Yeah.
pick and choose what you consider important and forget everything else. And what you want to remember anyway, you change and distort to your own advantage. So,
Yeah.
as I said, nothing that you read about the Yalta and Potsdam meetings is true, by the way. I mean, there was no discussion at those meetings about spheres of influence in Europe or anything like that, for example. I mean, that is a complete myth which has been debunked many times
Mhm.
and yet continuously gets resurrected. And as for China, I can absolutely tell you without any doubt at all that if you go out into the streets in Britain and talk to British people and ask people what role did China play in the Second World War, most of them would assume that it played no role at all.
Yeah.
When I say most of them, I'd
Hmm.
say well over 99% of them.
Yeah.
The number of people in Britain who know anything about China and what China happened in China is minuscule.
Yeah.
And it is disgraceful, by the way. It is absolutely shocking that it should be that way. And of course, it's that way because it is convenient to the powers that exist here
Yeah.
in the West to keep it that way. As I said, the Chinese people, as I've said many times, have the best historical memory. And this is a tradition that goes back throughout their history. The Russians do have a historical memory. In the West, as I said, it's the Orwellian approach
Yeah.
that, we choose that part of our history that suits us and make it up a bit also to suit us as well.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that Trump, when he was talking about this deal with China, which we will talk about later, he said that one of the things that China agreed is to China to open up everything, which I think he refers to financial market, which nobody think is true, but he likes to do that. I think that's probably will moving forward. China will discuss that with the U.S. At the U.S. Request, but I don't think China, agrees to open up its financial market for now. But in any event, Trump like to talk about, okay, China is opening up everything. for the United States. It's good for China. It's good for us, United States. And then he said, it's good for unification and peace. Now that got explosive coverage in China, both in Taiwan
Oh,
and in,
really?
yeah. And of course,
Oh, really? Interesting.
inside Taiwan, everybody is saying, "Oh, no, that's not what he meant. He meant unification, meaning China and the U.S. will be in sync." No, that's not what he says. It's very clear what he said.
No. Yes.
But just so you know, it's a lot of things interesting
Yeah.
going on with Trump right now. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yes, I'm going to make a suggestion. In fact, that again with Trump, I mean everything is all over the place. You never
Yeah.
quite know what he means and what he doesn't mean. I sometimes think that he says these extraordinary things about China opening up its financial markets in order to manage to sneak something else in, which might be in this case unification, because he didn't really need to mention unification at all.
No.
Actually,
No.
if you take a step back and think about this. Now, I know that there are some people within the Trump administration, Vance, for example, I was saying, look, the United States has no interest in a conflict with China over Taiwan. It makes no sense for us. Vance he comes across to be as somebody who absolutely does believe that what America needs to do at the moment is look after itself and not get involved in wars in all sorts of other places and conflicts in all sorts of other places. I don't mean by that to suggest, by the way, that he is a friend of China. I don't think that's the spirit in which he's saying this, but I wonder whether he's simply saying to Trump, well, look, we've got to get along with China. This issue of Taiwan is just a distraction. It's just a way to get, the arms lobby and people like Lindsey Graham and all those people to exert influence. And you see how destructive that's been altogether. So, let's actually think about how to end this thing by agreeing to unification. After all, it's one part of China reunifying with another part of China. And Trump comes along and he says this extraordinary thing about opening up Chinese financial markets in order to introduce this idea of reunification, which, if he'd said it in any other way, might be controversial. It's the kind of thing Trump sometimes, it seems to me, does. Anyway, I didn't know that it had caused so much interest in China. Well, it's a step forward. Let's see whether it follows through, because with Trump, you never know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the State Department came out also trying to rolling back, walk back and etc. But Trump himself never came back and said that that's not what I meant. He never said that, So we go with what he said, right? So
yes.
Okay. So the deal between the U.S. and China is not much of a deal. It's a pause, right? So it's basically saying we're going back to April 2nd, which is what China wanted. China has said all along is if you want to talk about trade, you talk about things, fine, but don't start with throwing all these ridiculous, tariffs and to using that as your bargaining chip. We're not playing that game. So now we are back to square one, basically. And it's just a pause. Now they have 90 days to really talk about a lot of issues. And what I looked at here, rare earth is what is still under heavy control by the Chinese government. Definitely the U.S. want more rare earth export. Treasury bonds, it's always a discussion about that. And from China's side, that there is some, of course, there's still tariffs on some of China's goods. And then there's some banned high-end chips and stuff like that, even though China need those things less now, but those are still possible discussions, and the ban on the Chinese EVs and then Huawei and all those sort of things. So the two sides still have a lot they want from each other. So we can say the talk starts now, right? There's no deal. It's a pause, right?
Absolutely. Oh, it's a pause, but I ought to say something. I mean, it's a pause that's going to continue indefinitely. I cannot imagine any reality in which Donald Trump puts the tariffs that he's just, cancelled back up again. They were creating a crisis within the United States, and give the man credit. Actually, I mean, it is very weird and very, very bizarre, but he he puts them up to these ridiculous levels. It looks as if he's been captured by the China haters, because that's what they are within the administration and the United States. Then he suddenly realizes both the incredible dangers of that and the fact that these people are actually China haters and that their agenda is different from his own. And then he carries out a complete retreat and he pulls it off. I mean, any other president who behaved like this would be, there would be calls out there for his resignation. I mean, there would be a huge political crisis. But Trump has this ability to do this and then to pull back completely. And somehow it doesn't seem to matter politically in America in the way that you would expect it to. So anyway, giving credit, but there is no conceivable way that he's going to build the tariffs up again. It's a pause for 90 days. It's inconceivable that all of these complicated things will be agreed within 90 days. But as you rightly said, we have a negotiation. We have proper negotiations, hopefully, going to start to happen. Hopefully, they will be led by more rational people than some of the people who've been running things up to now, people like Stefan Moran and Peter Navarro and all of those people. And we will see our way towards some sort of agreement. It may take a long time to sort out because these things do. Now, logically, and in a rational world, we didn't need to go through this whole absurdity of the tariffs to get to this position. As you absolutely correctly said, I mean, the Americans have retreated back to where they started. They didn't need to do all of that. They could have started this on the day that Trump was inaugurated. He could have got this whole negotiation started. China would have been fully open to that. But heavens knows, this is America. We're not dealing with fully rational people. Perhaps we had to go through all of this in order to bring home to the Americans that, contrary to what they believe, they don't actually have all the cards. They can't dictate to China. And in that respect, the fact that we've been through this madness gives us more hope that we're actually going to get a better outcome than we might otherwise do.
Now, the Trump, US and UK had a deal, but it's not what my understanding, the free trade deal that UK wanted, right? So what's your take on that? What this deal between US and UK?
Well, Starmer's political position, the Prime Minister's political position, is gradually collapsing. Again, this isn't very visible from the outside, but it is. I think there's an opinion poll which now shows him the most unpopular Prime Minister in modern British history. He's losing support with the members of his own party. And there was a very, very acrimonious meeting with the parliamentary faction of his party about a week ago, which he didn't attend, by the way, to the anger of his parliamentary faction, which apparently people's anger boiled over. And they were saying, what is he doing? I mean, where is he most of the time? He's mostly talking about Ukraine. He doesn't seem to be interested in the problems in Britain and all of that. Now, Britain has a very difficult economic situation, which is deteriorating. If you live here, you can see the deterioration that is taking place, and the financial situation, the government's fiscal position, is deteriorating as well. So Trump comes along, he announces all these tariffs. He puts 25% tariffs on motor cars and steel and aluminium and all that kind of thing. The British car industry heavily depends on exports to the United States. Some of the key car makers who make cars for very, very rich people, Land Rover especially, but Bentley, Rolls-Royce, they're in crisis. So Starmer has to achieve a quick success, and he has to do something to sort out the problems of the car industry. So he does this deal with Donald Trump, but he does it quickly. And it is entirely on American terms, because the Americans keep their 10% tariffs. They've reduced some of their tariffs on motor cars, so Land Rover will probably survive. We have to buy American beef, which many people in Britain don't want to do for all sorts of reasons, which I'm not going to bore your audience, your viewers with. But ultimately, it is a deal that works more to the benefit of the Americans than it does to us. And as you absolutely rightly say, it is not a free trade deal because American tariffs remain in place. And it means that British exporters to the United States are paying higher tariffs than they were before Trump started to roll out tariffs in March. So far from this being a free trade deal, Britain's trade position with the United States is worse than it was 2 months ago.
And I thought that he would certainly bring up the movie, right? The Trump would put movies, but there was no mention about movies. Movies we talked about very important for British economy, right? And so there's nothing about that. Okay, so there's still tariffs on on movies. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. In the meantime, okay, so Brazil, Lula is visiting Beijing. And I think there will be more South American countries. I think Peru and Chile probably are coming. Their leaders are coming to Beijing. So they are now definitively, they have been using this opportunity when China stopped buying the US agriculture products. So they are shifting to South America, and these countries have what China needs, like soybeans and stuff like that. So sometimes, I mean, in this situation, I'm not even sure for between US and China, these kind of things can go back because China already signed deals with the different countries, like beef from Argentina, soybeans from Brazil, stuff like that. And they're still ongoing. They're still continue to sign more deals. I'm not sure it can easily go back in terms, some parts of it, right? So the damage is done. Some of the damage is done, right?
Well, absolutely. Now, here you can see how absolutely disastrous this whole tariff thing turned out to be. Because remember, when they announced the tariffs, then they sort of scaled down some of the tariffs on some countries. They would say, "Oh no, this is all some great clever plan to isolate China. We're going to keep tariffs high on China and keep tariffs low on other countries, and we're going to do all these deals with all these other countries to make sure that they trade with us and they don't trade with China. If they want to trade with us, they will have to agree to put restrictions on their trade with China. And we're getting all these countries coming forward and they're agreeing to do that. And we've got, was it 70 countries supposedly that are going to make those kind of agreements. Well, as I said, it was all absolute nonsense. And we see that what's actually happened is the precise opposite. So Latin American countries, South American countries, which were spared the worst of the tariffs, what do they all do? They all rush off to Beijing and they do deals with the Chinese. So Lula goes to China, of course, Brazil, which 15 years ago looked like it was a rising economy, but then has hit all kinds of problems. And it's very, very dependent on Chinese investment. It needs the Chinese market, soybeans and beef and all that from Brazil. Argentina, Milei hates China, can't bear communists, loves the United States. He's going to walk back all the trade deals with China. Doesn't take him very long to realize that that's an unsustainable position as well. So what does he do? He's also seeking to make deals with China as well. So all of that brave talk from Milei, we see it amount to nothing. So of course, exactly. I mean, they're all going to do these deals with China. They're going to sell their agricultural products to China. They're going to continue to sell their lithium to China, their raw materials in China. They're going to want China's help to develop electric cars and to develop 5G networks and even 6G networks, of which China is about the only country that's doing them. Anyway, so that's what they're going to want to do, because everybody prefers the rising sun to the setting one. That's a bit cruel. That's the truth.
Yeah. Speaking of which, the Pakistan and India conflict, last time we talked a little bit about that. At the time, is not clear. I mean, Pakistan claimed at the time that they shut down 5 fighter jets from India, but later
they unequivocally did. Even
yeah.
even India is now admitting it.
Yeah. So the interesting part of that is, even though China wasn't in the conflict, but China
No.
weapon was. So the J10 now everybody knows
Yeah.
is the one that Pakistan used. J10
Yeah.
turns out is not even the top fighter jet of China.
No.
So
Not remotely.
yeah,
Not remotely. It was developed in the 1980s.
yeah.
I remember when it happened. I mean, I remember it was apparently the person who advocated for it within China was Deng Xiaoping. So that takes you back. That tells you how far back it goes. It was the Chinese development of, basically, it's a 4th generation fighter jet.
Yeah.
So it's equivalent. Its closest equivalent is the Sukhoi 27 in the in Russia, and the F-15 in the United States. Now, so I mean, it's not absolute cutting edge. Now, the Rafale, the French Rafale jet, which was shot down, and I'm now hearing that it wasn't, in fact, even 2. It may have been more than that. Some say as many as 4.
Yeah, 4.
Is
Yeah.
supposed to be a much more advanced fighter jet. Except, as we now see, it isn't. So there it is. I mean, that tells you. I have a lot of friends in India, I should say. It's a country that I have contacts with. The Indians are absolutely hopping mad about this. They're furious. They're furious because they were sold this equipment by the French, which came at an enormous price. I've been seeing the price difference between the French Rafale and the Chinese. Was it JC10? I mean, the Rafale is about 10 times more expensive.
Yeah.
just to say. So they feel that they were taken for a ride over the Rafale. They are furious about the whole American mediation exercise. I don't fully get the inside story here, but they feel that the US put unacceptable pressure on India to agree to the ceasefire. And apparently, Indian public opinion is furious about this. And Modi himself has had to come out and respond to all of this. So India feels very, very bad about this whole incident. And if the original plan behind this was to create rifts within the BRICS, it's done the opposite. It's created a rift. It's created anger in India towards the United States. Even a publication like The Economist is admitting as much. And if you go to the Indian media, which, by the way, don't bother, it's almost impossible to make sense of. But I do, because I said I've got friends there. The Indian media, the people there are furious, and they reflect all of this too.
Yeah, I feel like we are now in another, like a Deepseek moment, from a weaponry perspective, which is everybody's paying attention. The West definitely, because they heard a lot about the China's advancement in the military industry, but they never seen it. So this time they've seen it, right? The J10, and then also the other thing is the PL-15, the missile. Somebody saw the debris of the missile, and it was made in 2015, which is 10 years old, that missile. So in other words, Pakistan is using not the most advanced weapon from China, but did really well. And with a fraction, you said, with a fraction of the cost. So we are now in another Deepseek moment, but this one is even more, I guess, threatening to the West because it's the military, right? It's not AI, but it's military, and that's where they pay a lot of attention. So I actually think
it's spooked them. I mean, it's absolutely spooked them. I mean, again, I'm not a person who takes a great who's a natural person for looking at this, but unfortunately, because of the work I do have to read the American military media. They are absolutely. I mean, they're beside themselves with what has happened. It has been a shock. I mean, they were already upset during the Ukraine conflict because it turned out that the Russians have much longer range missiles than the United States does, and were successfully shooting down Western made or Western supplied fighter jets at much longer ranges than the Americans could do. But that's the Russians. I mean, they're like us, really. They're Europeans. They're they're our old Cold War adversaries. Horror of horrors. The Chinese can do it too. They could do it even better. My God, we're falling behind, and it is provoking something of a crisis. And by the way, if you look at the film of Modi afterwards, it's very interesting because when he goes and congratulates the Indian military on how well they've done, it's very interesting. He doesn't go and he isn't shown with any of the fighter jets, the aircraft. He goes and is photographed next to a Russian supplied, as it happens, air defense missile. So you can see the dynamic that's going on here. I mean, this is a shock. It's a shock in Britain too, by the way.
Well, in many ways, I think it's probably good for world peace now, because now the West cannot just go in any other country believing I can just do whatever I want. If China gets in, China helping the small, weaker country, it's not necessarily you can win outright, right? So it's a real challenge to the Western supremacy in the battleground, in the military front. I think it's good to have a balance. What do you think?
Well, it is very good to have a balance, but it demonstrates that, if I could call it that, the shadow of China is getting longer, and that is having a major effect altogether on international relations. The Americans are very uncertain how to respond to this. So we've had the major reverse on the tariffs, which was it was a shock. I mean, that wasn't expected. There's now trouble in the bond markets again. There's talk that the treasury markets are unstable, and as you correctly said, hope that the Chinese will come to the rescue there. America having to, well, we talked about it in previous programs, roll over, was it $7 or $9 trillion of debt this year? So there's all of that happening. There's the fact that all of these countries are doing deals with China or the Latin American states, Lula. There's worries about the future position of the dollar because it looks like BRICS unity has been preserved and that the BRICS are moving forward, and there's a tendency at the moment to exit the dollar. There's talk about rumors that the BRICS states are going to move forward with a new payment system in which the RMB is going to play a role. Just to say, I don't know how real those are. And of course, the Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, where he's seen as as I said, the primus inter pares, the first amongst equals, the most important leader, and is being talked about in that way. So, altogether, there is this sense that China is moving and the West is struggling to come up with responses. And the fact that Chinese military technology has proved extremely effective has been a shock. As you correctly said, it comes after Deepseek. It comes after the revelation that the Chinese are somehow able to make these advanced chips and that they're not being held back here. It comes as there are increasing articles across the West that China is actually ahead of the United States in AI. So we're at a very, very fragile moment altogether in the West, more so than I think people in China realize, maybe.
Yeah, I think so too. I think lots of time people, most people in China shocked with, Pakistan was able to use the Chinese J10. Like I said, I mean, J10
Yeah,
is almost like on
yeah.
its way out. It's retiring to fighter
Yeah,
jet.
it is. It is on its way out. I mean, there's no question about this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's being replaced with more advanced fighter jets.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
the la it's the previous generation of
Mission, yeah.
Chinese
Uh-huh.
fighter jets,
Yeah. So,
developed, as I said, in the 1980s.
mhm. So okay, Trump's visit to the Middle East. There's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah,
First, he
yeah,
signed this agreement with the Saudi, 600 billion, whatever the billion. He signed several, like a
yeah.
huge billion-dollar deal. But just to take a look at the Saudis' 600 billion deal. So the New York Times did, and I think Axios did that too. They actually looked item by item. So what they did is they added up its amount to about 288 billion. So their question is, okay, you signed a deal for 600 billion. How come, add up is only 288? Let's say it's 300, so half of that much. What happened to the other, the remaining 300 billion? The speculation is those are possibly treasury bonds. So that's so
Yeah.
that and then in general, these kind of a frame agreement, there is no deadline. It doesn't say, within this number of
No.
years you have to do this and that. It's a very broad, frame investment. So it's probably not as much as it looks. What do you think?
Well, that's absolutely correct. I mean, if I can say so, this is all a repeat of what happened a few weeks after Trump became president in 2017.
Yeah,
He went
yeah.
to Saudi Arabia. There was
Mhm,
this enormous meeting there.
mhm,
All the same people were there: King Salman,
uh-huh,
the Crown Prince. They were, there was this enormous, pomp and circumstance. All these agreements were signed, and we didn't hear anything more about them afterwards. I mean, most of them amounted to nothing. And I can't help but think that it's the same this time round also. There is the appearance of an enormous number of agreements being done, of hundreds of billions of dollars, being shuffled around. But I doubt that there is very much substance to this. And I'm going to say something else. There's been some very interesting studies here in Britain looking at the actual financial realities in Saudi Arabia itself.
mhm,
And yes, it's still a rich country. Yes, it still has very, very, very big reserves. I mean, cash reserves.
mhm,
But these are not as big as they were. Apparently, Saudi Arabia has a chronic problem of overspending.
mhm,
Its currency is tied to the dollar, so it's pegged to the dollar, so it can't adjust um, in the way that it probably would need to if the economy were to be run successfully. And I've seen some suggestions that in reality, Saudi Arabia has been running a budget deficit for about 10 years.
mhm.
So it is actually running its funds down. So it doesn't have that much to give as perhaps Trump imagines. And that this could be the real reason why there's been this big shift in Saudi policy over the last 5 years, why they've ended their conflict with Iran,
Mhm.
why they've tried to disengage from the Houthis, why they're trying to um, make overtures to China and to Russia,
Mhm.
because they understand that this overambitious foreign policy that they were conducting is no longer fiscally sustainable.
One thing the Western media doesn't cover much about Trump's speech in Riyadh, I think, with a huge audience there, including the crown prince. He gave this a big speech talking about the collaborations, etc. But there is one part that got lots of attention in China and also in the social media, but not the mainstream media. So this is what he said. It's crucial for the wider world to note that this great transformation, he's talking about the Middle East has been transformed. This great transformation
Mhm.
has not come from Western intervention, policy of flying people and beautiful planes, giving you lectures on how to live and how to govern your own affairs. No, the gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by the so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits, like those who spend trillions of dollars failing to develop Kabul, Baghdad, so many other cities. Instead, the birth of modern Middle East has been brought by people of the region themselves, the people that are right here, the people that have lived here all their lives, developing your own sovereign countries, pursuing your own unique visions, and charting your own destinies in your own way. It is really incredible what you've done. In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies that they did not even understand themselves. They told you how to do it, but they had no idea how to do it themselves. Peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions. I find that's remarkable.
Oh,
I
it is.
find
It is
that's
absolutely.
remarkable.
No, it is. It is. It's revolutionary. I mean, it is an
Yeah.
astonishing speech. It has attracted a lot of attention in Russia as well, by the way.
Okay.
And some people in Russia, by the way, link it to the Ukraine negotiations,
Uh-huh.
and to they're probably wrong, by the way. I mean, it probably goes beyond that, but also they feel that Trump is also making his private feelings about Lindsey Graham known, because Lindsey Graham has been meddling a lot in the Ukraine negotiations. And of course, he's precisely one of these people who was most heavily involved in all of these wars in the Middle East that Trump is so critical of. But put that aside, I think it is a revolutionary moment in American foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
Marco Rubio said something very similar just after he became Secretary of State. But this goes well beyond that. And he actually uses words like, the neocons and the
Yeah.
neoliberal
Mm-hmm.
non-profits. I mean,
Yeah.
he actually uses those specific words. Now, if he can build on all of that, if he can really consolidate this,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that there's hope for Trump and the United States, after all, is all I can say, because he's absolutely, I mean, everything that he said there is absolutely right. And again, it's extraordinary that Trump is able to say this and he doesn't get fury and rage poured down on him.
Mm-hmm.
It shows what an extraordinary position in the United States he's managed to carve out. So I hope he follows through with that, not just in the Middle East, but with China, with Taiwan,
Mm-hmm.
with the Middle East, with Ukraine, with everything else. And of course, the fact that he's now talking about unification between
Yeah.
China and Taiwan, that is, of course, completely consistent with what he's just said there.
I just wish the mainstream media talk more about the speech. They don't, they don't bring this out, to repeat it, to be shown on their channels prominently. They seem pretty quiet about that, but I'm glad to hear what he just said. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, I mean, it's just like with Xi Jinping. I mean, they
yeah,
just
yeah.
don't mention anything he says. With Trump, again, they just take whatever they want to take out of his
Uh-huh.
speeches and
Yeah.
twist it and turn it and make it what they want as part of the narrative that they're trying to construct.
Well, Trump's relationship with Netanyahu, what is your take on that? That they are not even talking to each other. And Trump, of course, has gone out pretty much doing what he believes is best for the United States and he didn't even visit Israel this time and ignore Netanyahu and his administration. What is your take on that?
Well, again, I think this is very interesting. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this, and I think we need to be very careful because Trump has a very, very long history of being deeply aligned with Israel. And
Mm-hmm.
remember, members of his own family are Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
his son-in-law is Jewish, Jared Kushner,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe his daughter, one of them, has become, has
Yeah.
converted to Judaism as well, and he's had long connections with Israel. I think there's been two things, well, three things at play. Firstly, I think Trump, who does take things personally, has never forgiven Netanyahu for
Yeah.
Netanyahu's backing of Biden, or
Yeah.
at least recognition of Biden in the 2020 election. And I think that is true.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that I think Trump did think that he and Witkoff had a genuine ceasefire secured over Gaza. And I think he's very angry that Netanyahu basically went back on all of that. But the big thing, the thing that has really angered Trump is Netanyahu's incessant lobbying for a war against Iran. And this started, to my knowledge, before Trump was inaugurated. Netanyahu was sending people to Washington to meet with Trump and to try to get him to agree to green light an attack on Iran. And Trump doesn't want to get drawn immediately into a war against Iran. And then I think what further happened, which I think infuriated Trump even more, is that he discovered that his own national security advisor, Mike Waltz, was working with the Israelis against him, in effect, that that he was acting as a lobbyist for the Israelis. And I think Trump was absolutely beside himself with anger about that, because as far as he's concerned, Mike Waltz is supposed to be his advisor, working for him, not for Netanyahu. And I think he was very, very angry about this. Now, I also suspect that Trump and some of the people around him still have suspicions about what Mike Waltz was doing with Signalgate, and whether this whole business with Goldberg was quite as much of a mess up as it looks, as we've been told, whether in fact there was more to it than that. And anyway, one way or the other, I think Trump is very angry with Netanyahu and absolutely does not want to be drawn into a war with Iran, and is very angry at constant lobbying from Israel to try to achieve that.
I think that Netanyahu overplayed the whole thing. I think he has always been this very I don't know. He has no respect to the president of the United States. It's not just the Trump. I don't think he respected Obama or Biden. In fact, what I read is that what White House provides a service for all the guests, foreign heads of states. When you visit, they can do your laundry. Netanyahu and his wife are the people who will bring in 6 bags of their dirty clothes to use this service. Why would you do something like that?
But indeed, why indeed, yes.
Well, other than trying
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and other than trying to show, I'm the big guy, you have to do these service for me. I guess that's what he's doing. But it's things like that, I think, must come to a point that somebody will say enough, right? I think Trump probably just had it. And Netanyahu, because previously Obama or Biden, they just never say no to him. He get used to it, right? And so he keep on doing these kind of thing. And they come to a point. Sooner or later, it will come to a point that somebody will say no to him. That's what I think is a part of that.
Well, that's right. I mean, I agreed. I mean, Netanyahu, he is incredibly manipulative. I mean, he's one of the most manipulative political leaders I have seen. And when people finally see through that, it's a very unattractive quality. That's the first thing to say. And I think Trump has seen through it finally. And as you absolutely rightly say, he's arrogant as well. So I think all of these things came together. And I think, well, one thing Trump does have is a very, very elevated sense of his own importance as president of the United States. But I think he also, and I did think generous, but honest, frank about Trump. I think he is inordinately proud of the United States. I think that is, it's actually one of his, I find it an endearing quality, actually. Whether there is so much about today's America to be proud of. But anyway, Trump is very proud of the United States. And I think seeing somebody like Netanyahu take America repeatedly for a ride, I think is it's something that I think he's finally lost patience with. He doesn't want a war. He's not a man who looks for wars. I think he remembers Vietnam, which was a big event when he was in his 20s. So he remembers Vietnam. He's also understands that wars have never worked well for America. So he doesn't want to get drawn into a conflict with Iran. And of course, Waltz, Hegseth, and Netanyahu all did draw Trump into this conflict with the Houthis, which has ended terribly. I mean, the Houthis were able to shoot down all those drones, all those super advanced American drones. 2 American fighter jets were lost. Apparently, the great F-35, remember we're talking about the JC-10, much more effective than turned out to be with 1980s technology, with the super duper, ultra advanced, stealthy F-35. Apparently, they've come close to being brought down by Houthi missiles, that kind of thing. And of course, billions of dollars have been spent and absolutely nothing has been achieved. And these same people who talked Trump into this operation against the Houthis, Netanyahu and the others, are coming along and telling him, well, we must also attack Iran. It'll be a cakewalk. And I think Trump is starting to see that these people just don't know what they're talking about and are around to involve him in all kinds of things, and the United States in all kinds of things that he simply doesn't believe in.
And I also see a shift now. It seems like there is a shift towards the West, towards what's going on in Gaza. So just the past few days, in particular, the British media. So the Financial Times had a editorial says the West's shameful silence on Gaza, which is new to me, that they would say something like that. Economist, the war in Gaza must end. The Independent, end of the deafening silence on Gaza. It's time to speak up. The Guardian, the Guardian's view on Israel and Gaza. Trump can stop this horror. The alternative is unthinkable. So these articles, they are all talking about genocide, which they didn't use the word before. They use conflict. And then they also urge the British government to do something, seems like. And also even Macron are saying that the Europeans should have a different view on what's going on towards Israel. Thomas Friedman, the New York Times, and he said that the Israeli government is not our ally. And then the conservative MP, Mark Pittard, he was speaking in the House of Commons, and he said he is no longer supporting Israel after 20 years, unwavering support of Israel. Now he said he withdrew that support to Israel. So there's a whole bunch of things seems happening. Do you think it is finally shifting?
Yes, it is. It's finally shifting. I think it's difficult to know exactly what has happened that is causing this shift, but it is there. I mean, I was watching a program on British television, which is co-hosted by Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's former press spokesman and who is a very, very important influencer in British life. And he's been an outspoken supporter of Israel. And he was showing pictures of what's going on in Gaza. And he was saying, this is absolutely unacceptable. It cannot go on. It must stop. So it's difficult to know what was exactly the tipping point, why we've reached that tipping point now, why it's taken us, more than a year and a half to get here. But it does look as if elite opinion is turning. Now, I should tell you something. I mean, my wife, this is just to tell your viewers, is somebody who's been outspokenly opposed to the genocide in Gaza from the first day. And she's put outside our house a huge poster saying, stop the genocide in Palestine. Anyway, one of the most remarkable things is that people come and knock on our door and say, I'm really glad that you put that there. And that's in London, again. And that's in North London, a rich, affluent area of North London. Well, fairly rich area of North London, but very, very much a heartland of, Labour support, for example, Starmer's support. So, I mean, it's certainly not what you would have expected. And it's starting to happen. So I don't know what exactly was the tipping point. Whether, it might even have been Trump in an odd kind of way contributed to this with his talk about clearing up Gaza and his picture of himself, gold statues of himself. Maybe that somehow finally drew people's attention to what was really going on there. But it does look as if finally people are saying enough. I don't know that Israel itself has understood this, by the way. I think that they probably haven't grasped the extent to which the tide is starting to turn.
Yeah, I wonder whether his cold relationship with Netanyahu has something to do with it. I think all these editorial people, the media, they must know what's going on. I mean, it's not a question that they don't know, but they have been, I think, they have been under a lot of pressure, including their own conscience, to speak lies all this time, right?
Yes.
That to support Israel. So finally they see, okay, maybe the United States is shifting. So they see that little crack, that was enough. I wonder whether that's it, you know.
I think that's absolutely right, but I think there's also a lot of pressures. So certainly in Britain there is from below. I mean,
Uh-huh.
people are becoming very, very upset about this. It's a topic that is talked about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, YouTube still suppresses all discussion of this.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
just to say that, but
Mm-hmm.
despite all of that, despite all of the attempts to sort of hold down this discussion,
Mm-hmm.
which you see in Britain,
Mm-hmm.
which you see in Germany even more, gradually, public opinion is becoming more and more agitated. There's more protests, there's more demonstrations, people are putting up more placards like my wife is doing. And people respond.
Yeah, and I also think we, even though Trump and Netanyahu are not getting along, but United States as a government still supporting Israel. They still
Yeah.
financially still supporting
Oh,
Israel,
yes, absolutely.
weaponry and all that kind of thing. So that hasn't changed. But
Absolutely.
the public opinion, the PR seems like there's a
Yes.
shift. So we will
Yes.
see. Yeah. Okay. Zelensky agrees to meet Putin now in Turkey. Uh, isn't that unconstitutional? That's what
Yes.
the Okay, so what happened there?
I've done program after program about this. It. I often say that in China you retain the one island of sanity left. This business with Ukraine is just so bizarre. I mean, it really is. So to try to describe a complicated situation very, very simply, Zelensky has consistently opposed direct negotiations with the Russians. He has passed a law in Ukraine which prohibits direct negotiations with the Russians.
Mhm.
Trump wants Trump wants to end this war. He's been talking about this ever since he became president. Trump has been saying, let's have a ceasefire. The Russians, for all sorts of reasons, have made it very clear that they don't want a ceasefire because they've been here before. They've done ceasefires. The Ukrainians have broken them and taken advantage of them. They're not going to go there again. But the Russians told Trump, we are prepared to negotiate directly with Ukraine. And on Saturday, whilst I think Xi Jinping was still in Moscow, just to say,
Mhm.
but whilst all sorts of other leaders anyway were still in Moscow, four European leaders, Macron, Starmer, Tusk, and Merz, went to Kiev, and they said, look, unless Russia agrees a ceasefire within 48 hours, we will impose massive sanctions on Russia, and the United States will join in those sanctions. And Putin said, look, I'm not listening to any of your ultimatums. I don't care about your ultimatums. I am prepared, however, to negotiate directly with the Ukrainians. I'm going to send I'm going to send a negotiating team
Mhm.
to Istanbul on Thursday. I'm hoping the Ukrainians will turn up. Now, we now know, by the way, the Russians have confirmed. I don't think this has been reported anywhere in the media in the West, but the Russians have confirmed, and Robert Fico, the Slovak leader, has said that the Russians told all of the delegations that came to Moscow that this is what they were going to do before that ultimatum was made. So it wasn't a proposal made in response to that ultimatum. And in particular, it seems they discussed this idea very carefully with Xi Jinping.
Mhm.
And Xi Jinping also wanted it to happen. And, it was, so the Chinese had some role in this. We don't know exactly what it was. Anyway, so Putin sends a negotiating team to Istanbul, and then all hell breaks loose because Zelensky says, we can't negotiate. We need the ceasefire. Trump's own officials say we can't negotiate. We need the ceasefire first. The Europeans all say that. Then suddenly Trump comes out and says, you have got to negotiate and go to Istanbul. So Zelensky is pushed into a corner. He then says, look, I'm not going to let anybody else go. I ain't going to go myself because I'm exempt from this decree. I can negotiate with the Russians, but nobody else can. But the only person I'm prepared to negotiate with is Putin. Putin, of course, there's never been any question of Putin going. This whole story about Putin going was ridiculous. But anyway, Zelensky goes. He doesn't go to Istanbul. He goes to Ankara. The Russian delegation is in Istanbul. It's kept waiting for 24 hours. But he goes to Ankara. He has this 3-hour meeting with Erdogan, who's obviously coordinating with Trump. And Erdogan tells him, you have got to send a negotiating team to Istanbul, because if you don't, Trump is going to be absolutely furious and all hell is going to break loose. So eventually, Zelensky ignores his own decree, forgets completely about the fact that this decree exists. It doesn't matter anymore. And he sends a negotiating team to Istanbul, which had a meeting with the Russians today, by the way. So it didn't last long, only 2 hours. And the sides didn't agree on anything. But it was the first one-to-one meeting between the Ukrainians and the Russians since March 2022.
It sounds so chaotic. The whole thing is so chaotic.
Well, as I said, it's mad. It is completely chaotic. And this is where I think everybody in the West is seriously at fault, because what they should do is take Zelensky to one side and tell him, Vladimir, look, you've had a good run, but this can't go on like this anymore. You've got to dial down the rhetoric. You've got to accept that there's going to be negotiations. We can't go on giving you support. We can't tolerate this kind of erratic, irresponsible behavior any longer. Instead of which they indulge him. They continue to call Zelensky, the Churchill, the hero, all of those things. And so, as I said, he just goes on behaving in this disruptive way, but chaotic is exactly what it was. I will say this, the Russians have gone through this last week showing extraordinary composure. The things Zelensky has been saying, and some European leaders have been saying, Merz called them barbarians.
Yeah.
and they've just calmly kept going in the face of all of this. It is professionalism taken to the highest level, actually, if I have to be honest.
Honestly, I really think that Zelensky, by now, he should be the one who eager to get a deal. So here is what I see. Looking at what happened in Pakistan and India, so everybody knows China's capability now. If you don't know this before, it's clear now. So in Zelensky's best case scenario, let's say he can pull in European countries to come fight with him. Even that is a big if. Let's say best case scenario, he could do that. Get the NATO come in. China already said, if NATO comes in, China will step in, will support Russia. So even if NATO comes in with China's capability, NATO is not going to win. He needs to understand that, right?
Yes. This is exactly what you've spoken in the way that people need to speak to Zelensky. The trouble is, nobody in Europe is able to talk to Zelensky in this clear, straightforward way. Because you're absolutely right. If China stepped in, it would be over. It's curtains. The mighty collective West has been unable to take on the Russians by itself. I mean, they've not been able
Yeah.
to do it. The Russians have outproduced them in shells, in
Mhm.
tanks, in all of that kind of thing. And, you know, Russia, I mean, well, I think it makes, what, 6 million tons of steel, 6 billion tons of steel a day or something. China makes 100 billion tons of steel a day or whatever it is. I mean, I'm not sure what, but
Uh-huh.
I mean, that is the difference.
Yeah.
Russia and China, Russia and the US, by the way, they produce roughly similar quantities of steel.
Yeah.
Just to say, just to give it an idea. But China is just right
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah.
And as you rightly said, the technology is of a completely different level. So I mean, you know, it would. I mean, the idea of even contemplating these sort of things, it's sort of as if he isn't already losing.
Yeah.
Every single day, I'm getting reports about how the Russians are moving forward, you know, one place after another.
Mhm.
And they're supposed to have 2 reserve armies, another 250,000 men being prepared to be committed to the battle. But you know, if as you absolutely rightly say, if he gets what he wants and
Mhm.
drags the Europeans in, and China comes in on the Russian side, then I mean, there won't be any Ukraine left at the end
Yeah.
of it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. He absolutely needs to do a deal.
Yeah.
And somebody needs to explain that to him.
Yeah. And the Democratic Party is also in disarray. I don't know if you heard about that. So they have an internal election. So this guy, David Hogg, who is a very young, 25-year-old school shooting survivor, a very articulate guy. So he won the West chairmanship through this election. But he said something. He said that one of the things he thinks the Democratic Party should do, of course, he wants a lot of reforms. And he said, for example, they should primary ineffective Democrats in safe districts, which I think is a very sensible thing to do, to say, well, that was too much. So now the Democratic Party, they void this election just so they don't want him. So they want to, now, once they do that, they're still working on that. Once they do that, there's serious discussion, lots of people within the Democratic Party saying, well, if they do that, I'm leaving the Democratic Party. I'll stop giving money. And then there are even people saying they could split the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on with the Democratic Party. Why is even talking about the primary ineffective Democrats in safe district could be such a big deal for them to do such a stupid thing? What's going on
Yes.
here?
Well, I mean, one of the great strengths of Trump at the moment is that he still represents a powerful political force in the United States. You would have thought that, going back to what we were saying, all of these problems and mistakes that he's made, there would be political consequences for him. In fact, one of his advantages is that the opposition to him, which is the Democratic Party, is continuing to sing. It's astonishing. They can't even capitalize on Trump's blunders and mistakes.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reason is that the Democratic Party has become so much part of machine politics for so long. It's been so much revolving around his donor base and things of this kind that it has lost its edge as a real political force. It no longer represents anything. It's basically a group of officials and bureaucrats and donors and a network of people, if you like, that exists basically to occupy various positions, to receive funds, to do all of that kind of thing. And it's more important to them that they retain control of their own internal structures than that they go out and win. The same problem, by the way, has hit the British Labour Party. I mean, they had a very popular leader in Jeremy Corbyn. They really did. Jeremy Corbyn is a very popular leader. He caught the imagination of the British people. The Labour Party did very well under his leadership. It grew enormously in size. It nearly won in 2017. Even in 2019, in the very unusual and difficult conditions of that election, it still held on to most of its vote, far away the greater part of its vote. And Corbyn still won many, many more votes, either than his predecessor, Ed Miliband, or his successor, Keir Starmer. So what does the Labour Party do? It conducts a massive campaign to remove Jeremy Corbyn, because Corbyn is somehow seen as an outsider. He's not part of the inner network. The donors don't like him and all that kind of thing. So the result is that we now have a prime minister who is, as I said, the most unpopular prime minister since records began. I'm afraid it tells you a lot about the decay of these once mighty institutions. I mean, today's Democratic Party has no resemblance to the party that it was in the days of Franklin Roosevelt or John Kennedy.
Yeah. We will see. I mean, I actually think if the Democratic Party being seriously weakened, if there is really a split, a whole bunch of people left, could be a good thing for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
That's probably what we need. Yeah.
I think the same about the Labour Party. I say this as a former member, by the way. I think that both in the United States and in Britain, the Democratic Party and the Labour Party are a major obstacle towards a return to real politics and to the kind of political change and reform that we need here.
Yeah. Last thing, MI6, they are looking for a new director, right? And that one unusually got lots of attention in China. So not because they're there are three front runners, they're all women. That's not what Chinese people pay attention to. The real front runner is Barbara Woodward, right? So he's the UK representative to UN, but he was also the ambassador to China at one point. What's interesting to me is that some British are skeptical about her just because they think she's too close to China. But in China, a lot of netizens were saying, oh, she was actually at one point was a teacher, working as a teacher in Chinese schools. And people were saying, oh, she might be a spy back then, as a teacher. What's your take on that?
They are almost certainly right. Can I say something? I've never had very many dealings with MI6, but of course, when in my university, they used to regularly recruit people. I mean, I was never asked, but one of my friends was. So, I mean, I knew a little bit about how they used to recruit people, and I knew the kind of people they used to recruit. And of course, they used to recruit them, they used to train them. Part of the training was involved field training, as it was called. And I'm sure that her teaching job in China was to establish field training, probably to get her perfected Chinese, to get to know the country a bit, to develop an understanding of China. And then she's obviously not just been a diplomat, because of course in Britain, as in many countries, in fairness, I mean, there's no clear dividing line between diplomats and spies. I'm sure she's been an MI6 person all her professional life, and she's trained as a spy. She's been a spy in China. She's done all kinds of work there, and now, of course, she's going to be made head of MI6. This is an interesting decision, actually, because assuming it is her, it means that someone in Britain has apparently come to the conclusion that China is the big hated enemy, not Russia anymore.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see if she becomes the one. Yeah, that would be interesting to watch. Okay. Okay. So let's talk next Friday. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much. Another interesting week, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Very, very interesting. Have a very good day. Have a very good day, Sophia. See you then.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.